I was deadheading roses when the phone rang, and for a second, my hands remembered being a mother before my mind did. I wiped the soil off my fingers, pressed the green circle, and said her name the way I'd said it since she was a toddler waking from a bad dream. Madison. Her voice was flat, like she'd ironed the warmth out of it. "We already got married, Mom." The shears stopped in midair. "Yesterday?" I heard myself ask, as if confirming a weather report. "Martha's Vineyard. Small, intimate. We only invited people who really matter. So, can you drop the beach house keys in the mail? Trevor and I want to spend our honeymoon there." In the silence that followed, my garden went louder. Bees nosing the lavender, a gull carving the sky, the faint hush of the tide pushing and pulling at the edge of our town. I looked at the Cape Cod house, beyond the hydrangeas, white shingles, blue shutters, a porch where my daughter learned to read, and where every summer we ate peaches over the sink. "Congratulations," I said, because there are words a mother says on principle even when her heart is falling down a flight of stairs. "Of course I can get you the keys." "Great," she said, relief rushing in. "Just soon. Trevor doesn't have time to plan a trip right now. We thought we'd drive up Friday." "Friday," I repeated, and I could hear, beneath the tidy syllables, the entire story already unfolding toward its middle. "I'll make sure you get them." She thanked me, told me the ceremony was perfect, and slipped in a catalog of polished details: his parents, a best man named Tom, a maid of honor named Jessica, photos the photographer promised to edit within a week. When she hung up, I stood in the garden with my phone in my palm and my breath lodged in my chest. A mother stands in many places: at the beginning, at the door, at the boundary between what she knows and what she can't control. I had been politely moved outside, as if I were furniture that didn't match the new decor. Inside, the house smelled like lemon oil and the faint salt that always drifts inland. I set the phone on the counter next to a half-sliced lemon and the list for the library, where I shelve books 3 afternoons a week. On the kitchen table sat a leather portfolio I'd chosen for the sturdiness of its stitching. The silver paper was already wrapped around it, the bow pinched into a crisp white arc. It was there before the phone call. It would have been there even if she'd waited until October. Because this story didn't begin with that call. It began 2 years ago, when my daughter came home carrying a man who viewed women like beachfront property, to be toured, praised, and acquired. I did what women of my generation do: when the ground shifts, we tidy, we prepare, we make something neat out of the mess. I brewed tea in the teapot with a hairline crack, the one that has survived 12 Christmases, 5 birthdays, and the day my ex-husband left a note on the table where my daughter used to color. While the kettle sang, I slid the portfolio closer and ran my palm over the wrapping. The paper made a soft whispering sound. It reminded me of my nursing days, how bandages rustled before you pressed them to a wound, and how the body sometimes needed pressure before it would stop bleeding. I had spent 72 hours gathering the contents: public records, photocopied articles, bank ledgers that traced a slantwise path from a man named William Morrison to my late husband's ruined accounts and back again to an inheritance my daughter had never been allowed to touch. There were notes, neatly typed, because precision is a kindness when the truth is hard. There was the name of a lawyer who still remembered my husband's shame, and the name of a federal agent who had been waiting for an opening. And there was the thing he wanted most from me: a small metal ring with 2 dull keys to a house he believed he could occupy, the way he had occupied my daughter's life, fully, carelessly, with the assumption that ownership would follow comfort. I made tea and let it cool. You learn, after years of being told you're too emotional, to temper your heat. But I am 65 years old, and I have seen the quiet ways women save their own lives. We save birthday cards, we save the right questions, we save copies, we save receipts and lullabies, and the softest part of the towel for a child's face. When men like Trevor call it drama, what they mean is consequence. The next morning, I parked across from Madison's building, a brick box with balconies that hold succulents and the occasional neglected bicycle. I had dressed as if for church: navy skirt, white blouse, the pearl studs my sister Janet gave me when I turned 50. People underestimate a woman in pearls. They assume you will say yes. They assume your hands never did night shift or lifted men heavier than their apologies. They do not expect you to walk up 3 flights of stairs and leave justice on a welcome mat. The hallway smelled faintly of tomato sauce and laundry soap. A muffled television laugh track echoed down the corridor. I set the silver package on their doormat and tucked the note beneath the bow. "Congratulations on your marriage," I'd written in my neat, nursing school script. "Every new husband should know about his wife's family history. With love, Carol." The keys were in there too, because I wanted him to open everything, to feel what it's like when the door you thought you owned opens onto a room you didn't plan for. On the way back down, I passed a young couple arguing softly about grocery brands, and for a moment, the ache rose in me like tide. This was what I'd imagined for my daughter. Ordinary, boring, tender logistics with someone who never used the word boundaries as a weapon. I sat in my car and watched the building's glass door for a full minute, then another, as if I might see deception flinch. Driving home, I took the long way along the water. In Cape Towns, the ocean is not scenery, it is upbringing. You learn to read it, where the green goes dark, where the chop means keep your distance, where the calm is only a surface. The beach house sat where it always had, shy of the dunes, the porch flagging a lazy ripple in the wind. Madison learned to swim here. She learned to grieve here. When we couldn't afford a vacation, we drove here anyway, because the ocean is free and generous and teaches you, over and over, that you are small and also capable of floating. Back in my kitchen, I poured another cup of tea and sat by the window where the afternoon throws ladder light across the floorboards. My phone lay face down on the table. If I had been the mother they'd written me as a prop to be moved off stage, I might have picked it up, texted a heart, mailed the keys, and pretended the hurt was manners. But there is a particular strength that arrives after 60. Not loud, not theatrical, but granite deep. It sounds like this in your head. I will not be erased from my own story. At 2:17 p.m., the phone blared my daughter's name, but delivered his voice raw, unspooled, a violin string snapping mid-note. "What the hell is wrong with you, you crazy old witch?" I stirred my tea. "Hello, Trevor. I take it you opened your wedding gift. You think this is funny? This is harassment. We're calling the police." "I'm confused," I said, and let the word do what it does in triage, slow the bleeding long enough to see. "What exactly would you report? That your mother-in-law mailed you public documents and clippings from the Portland Press-Herald archives? That she included the business filings tying William Morrison to a project with Robert Thompson in 1987? That a dying man confessed theft to his grandson, and that grandson's lifestyle has been unusually well-financed ever since?" There was a scrape and a clatter, like a phone tossed, and beneath it, Madison's voice thin, tremoring. "Trevor, calm down. Let me talk to her." "No," he barked. "This woman is obsessed. She's trying to destroy us." I pictured him then. Handsome, polished, folding in on himself like expensive paper meeting a match. "Trevor," I said softly, "the way you speak to patients who think volume is a defense. The law firm that handled my late husband's estate would like to chat. They're interested in the offshore accounts mentioned in your grandfather's statement. Apparently, there's quite a bit of money that legally belongs to Madison." Silence, sudden and heavy, as if the air had changed barometric pressure. When he spoke again, the rage had thinned to something like panic. "You're lying." "I was a nurse for 38 years. We are trained to be precise with facts, but by all means call Mr. Rodriguez in Miami. He remembers you." I could hear Madison whispering, asking questions he wasn't answering. The house creaked as a breeze moved through, the old wood answering weather with memory. "Oh, and Trevor?" I added, because some lessons require a careful dose. "The beach house keys are in the portfolio. Consider them part of the gift. Ocean air is good for difficult conversations." I ended the call without hurry and set the phone down with a small click that felt, in my bones, like a gavel. Outside, a gull cut a clean white seam across the blue. The roses leaned into their own fragrance. Somewhere in a third-floor walk-up, a man was learning that the shorelines he'd been mapping were not, in fact, his to redraw. And somewhere just beyond him, my daughter, the girl who once swam fearlessly past the buoys and waved at me from the cold, brave water, was turning toward the truth with the slow, inevitable grace of a tide. This is how it begins, not with revenge but with clarity, not with shouting but with paper and patience, not with a slammed door, but with a key. 2 years earlier, Madison had arrived at my front door on a Friday night, her arms wrapped around a bouquet of roses and her smile wider than I'd seen in months. Behind her stood Trevor Morrison, handsome in the way that felt curated, like a man stepping out of a magazine ad rather than into a family home. His suit was too sharp for a casual dinner, his shoes polished enough to reflect the porch light. "Mom, this is Trevor," Madison said, glowing in the way women glow when they believe they've found the person who finally understands them. "He's different. He really gets me." I had made lasagna, because for 20 years, lasagna had been the language of my love. The kitchen was warm with garlic and simmering tomatoes, the same kitchen where Madison once did homework, with pencils chewed to stubs, where she'd cried over her first breakup, where I'd promised her that no man was worth her silence. Trevor walked in with a practiced ease, complimenting the house, the food, the inviting feel of our little Cape Cod home. He set down the roses with exaggerated care, then pulled out my chair for me as if we'd been rehearsing hospitality for an audience. I noticed the way he placed his hand on the small of Madison's back, not affectionate, but proprietorial, as though he were guiding her through his own introduction. Dinner unfolded like a play. He asked about my nursing career, and though his questions were thoughtful, they landed too neatly, as if he had studied my resume beforehand. He complimented the lasagna, offered to wash dishes, and smiled so often that I felt the weight of it, heavy and insincere. Still, Madison looked at him like he had hung the moon, so I swallowed my doubts the way mothers do when their daughters bring home hope wrapped in charm. Later, when he hugged me goodbye, Trevor whispered, "Your mother raised an amazing daughter. You must be so proud." Pride. Of course I was proud. Madison had built a marketing career from the ground up, bought her own condo, traveled without waiting for anyone's permission. She was strong-willed, independent, the kind of woman I'd hoped she'd become. But something in Trevor's voice scratched at me. He said it like Madison was a prize he'd acquired, not a partner he cherished. The next day, I called my sister Janet. "He's very interested in our traditions," I told her, "especially the beach house. He asked about it 3 times over dinner." Janet laughed softly. "That's sweet, Carol. It means he wants to be part of the family." Maybe. But as I rinsed the lasagna pan, I remembered Robert, my ex-husband, Madison's father, whose charm had always been 2 shades too bright. Robert could make strangers feel seen until he decided they were no longer useful. Trevor's smile looked like Robert's in photographs, all light on the surface, shadows at the edges. Over the next few months, Trevor's presence expanded, like ivy, charming, persistent, impossible to pull off once it had taken root. He had opinions about Madison's friends, her work, even how often she should call me. Where we once spoke daily, our conversations slipped to weekly, then monthly, then barely at all. "Trevor thinks I should focus more on our relationship," Madison explained when I asked why she was distant. "He says successful couples prioritize each other." The words stung because they echoed phrases I'd heard before, from men who cloaked control in the language of love. Still, I told myself I was being overprotective. Madison was 28, capable of making her own choices. If she was happy, wasn't I supposed to be happy too? But then came the engagement party. I didn't hear about it from Madison. I heard about it from Facebook. Scrolling one morning, my coffee cooling on the table, I stopped at a photo of my daughter's left hand, a diamond ring catching the sun. The caption read, "He asked." I said yes. "Can't wait to start our forever together." 53 likes, comments pouring in from friends and coworkers. Not one of them wondered why her mother wasn't tagged. For 10 minutes I stared at the screen, numb. My daughter was engaged, and I had learned about it like a stranger passing a bulletin board. I called her immediately. "Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry," she gushed, her voice breathless with excitement. "It just happened last night. Trevor surprised me at our favorite restaurant, and then we called his parents. It got so late I was going to call you this morning, I swear." I forced warmth into my voice, though my throat felt raw. "Congratulations, sweetheart. Tell me everything." For 20 minutes, she did. The ring, the romantic proposal, the way Trevor's parents cried with joy. Then she slipped in. "They're planning an engagement party at the country club. Just immediate family and a few close friends." I asked when I should come. The pause on the line was long enough to bruise. "Mom, Trevor's family has very specific traditions. His mother is very traditional. She planned everything, and it's really just for his side." I felt something cold settle in me. "So I'm not invited." "It's not that you're not important," Madison rushed. "It's just that we want to respect their customs." Respect their customs. Exclude your mother. Smile for the photos. When we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the framed picture of Madison at age 12, grinning in a sundress, hair frizzed by salt air, holding seashells from the Cape. She had once declared she'd get married at the beach house barefoot in the sand, fairy lights between the dunes. Now, my daughter was walking into someone else's tradition, and I was already being pushed to the edges of her story. And Trevor, with his polished shoes and his too perfect manners, was at the center. The weeks after that phone call stretched like winter evenings, dark earlier than they should be. Madison called less and less, and when she did, her words sounded borrowed, as if she were repeating lines written by someone else. "Trevor thinks it's healthier if we establish boundaries," she told me one night, her voice cautious. "Couples need space to grow without interference." Interference. The word landed between us like a slammed door. For years, my daughter had called me on her lunch breaks, while folding laundry, while waiting in traffic. We'd laughed about bad dates, argued about which Netflix series deserved a binge, shared inside jokes no one else would get. Now, those daily threads unraveled, replaced by silence Trevor called independence. When I pressed gently, Madison insisted she was happy. "He just wants us to start our own traditions, Mom. Don't you want that for me?" Of course, I wanted her happiness. But happiness, real happiness, doesn't erase your mother from your engagement party, doesn't tell you to forget the traditions that built you. Still, I bit my tongue and told myself she was an adult. If she was glowing, maybe the darkness I felt was only my own. But the shadows thickened. I found out about her wedding dress shopping from Instagram. Photos of Madison beaming in silk, Trevor's mother standing proudly beside her, hands clasped as if Madison were already hers. The caption read, "Saying yes to the dress." Hearts and comments flooded in. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't even there. When I tried to ask about the wedding plans, I was met with vague smiles. "Trevor's handling most of it," she said once. Another time, "His mother has connections." Each answer cut me smaller until I felt like a spectator in my own daughter's life. The cruelest moment came during a conversation about the venue. Madison mentioned October New England's leaves burnished in gold, the air crisp and sweet. I brightened, suggesting, "Why not the beach house? You always dreamed of marrying there, barefoot on the sand with lights strung between the dunes." Her voice turned sharp, unfamiliar. "Oh no, Mom. Trevor wants something more elegant, more sophisticated than a backyard beach wedding." Backyard. The word stung worse than being excluded from Facebook. That house wasn't just a backyard. It was our refuge after Robert left, the place Madison learned to swim, where we spent Christmas mornings in pajamas, where grief softened into laughter. For her, it had once been sacred. For him, it was inadequate. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the quiet pressing down like a heavy quilt. On the coffee table lay a photo album filled with summers by the Cape. Madison running into the surf, sticky with popsicle juice, hair tangled with sea salt. She had wanted that house for her wedding. Now she dismissed it because Trevor told her to. I thought about my own mother, who raised 3 girls during a time when women were told to keep silent and smile. She used to say, "A daughter is your echo. Sometimes you hear your voice, sometimes you hear how far it's traveled." I listened for my echo in Madison and heard only distance. And yet, under the ache, a question began to form. Why was Trevor so invested in the beach house? Why did he mention it during our first dinner? Why did Madison suddenly dismiss it, after years of dreaming about it? The pieces weren't clear yet, but I knew this. When a man works that hard to sever a woman from her family, he's not protecting her. He's protecting himself. I didn't have proof. Not then. Only the gut instinct of a woman who had once survived charm that turned to cruelty, promises that turned to debts. But in my bones, I knew. Trevor's interest wasn't love. It was possession. And possession never ends well. It was a Tuesday evening when the phone rang, ordinary as folded towels and the faint smell of lavender detergent. I was reorganizing the linen closet when Madison's name lit the screen. I pressed it quickly, as if she might disappear if I waited. "Mom, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice tight, rehearsed. "And I need you to be cool about it." That phrase, "be cool," has never meant good news. "Of course," I answered, though my stomach clenched. She hesitated, then launched into it. "Trevor's been reading about family dynamics and healthy boundaries. He thinks it's really important that we start our marriage by being independent from you." There it was, blunt and dressed up as psychology. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "Independent how?" "Well," she said carefully, "I've always relied on you emotionally. I call you when I'm upset instead of working it out with him. Trevor showed me some articles how mothers can sabotage marriages by being too close. I don't want to be that wife." I closed my eyes, the words pressing into me like cold hands. "Talking to your mother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. It's normal, Madison." "But is it?" she whispered. "Trevor says it creates dependence. So, we think it's best if we have less contact. Holidays with his family this year. And..." Her pause was the kind that changes a life. "And we should talk about the beach house." My throat tightened. "What about the beach house?" "Oh!" I always thought I'd inherit it. But Trevor says that puts pressure on us. He feels like he can't really relax there, like it's not ours. He doesn't want to feel like we're under scrutiny from you. He thinks we should find our own place, somewhere truly ours. Scrutiny. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Madison, who'd barely let me see Trevor twice in a year, claimed he felt scrutinized. What he meant was, "Your house is valuable, and I want it without strings." I swallowed the fury. "That house has been in our family for 15 years. It's where you learned to swim, where we've celebrated every holiday since your father left." "I know, Mom." Her voice softened, almost childlike. "I treasure those memories. But I'm starting a new family now, with Trevor. We need our own special places. Special places that excluded me." When we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the closet door I'd left open. Neatly stacked towels stared back, indifferent to the fracture in my chest. For a long time, I heard only my own breathing, steady the way it used to be during night shifts in the hospital when lives balanced on a monitor's beep. Trevor wasn't just pulling Madison closer, he was peeling her away from me like bark stripped from a tree. It was isolation disguised as devotion, manipulation dressed in therapy jargon. I had seen this before in my patients, in neighbors, in friends whose partners redefined love as control. But now, it was my daughter. I thought of Robert, how his betrayal had hollowed me, but also forced me to rebuild from the ground up. I had raised Madison alone, fought through late bills, skipped dinners so she wouldn't, celebrated every small victory. Our Christmas mornings in pajamas, our hot chocolate spilling marshmallows, our laughter loud enough to cover absence. Those weren't just traditions, they were survival. And Trevor wanted to erase them. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and began writing names. Madison's college friends. A nurse I knew who once mentioned a cousin scammed by a charming man. Old colleagues who kept gossip like tucked-away files. I wrote and rewrote, crossing out, circling, building a map of places to start digging. Because something in me had shifted. This wasn't just about a house. It wasn't even just about a wedding. It was about losing my daughter to a man who had studied her vulnerabilities the way a predator studies prey. And if Trevor thought I would go quietly, he hadn't learned a thing about the women in this family. The legal pad became my compass. Over the next week, I turned quiet suspicion into something solid. Nights that should have been spent with tea and novels were instead filled with internet searches, whispered phone calls, and questions slipped into conversations with Madison's old college friends. What I found painted a picture clearer than I wanted to see and darker than Madison could imagine. Trevor Morrison was not new at this. There was Emma, whose parents owned a successful restaurant chain. She, too, had been slowly pulled away from her family. Their engagement ended abruptly when her father discovered Trevor's gambling debts buried beneath layers of polished charm. Before Emma, there was Sarah, whose trust fund Trevor had tried to weave into his net. Her brothers intervened just in time, pulling her free. Different women, same pattern. Intelligent, independent, successful, but with family assets that glimmered like bait to him. He would court them, isolate them, and when he felt their defenses were down, he would reach for what was never his. And now, he had Madison successful in her career, emotionally softened by years of loneliness, and standing in line to inherit a beach house that had doubled in value since the housing market boom. She was his ideal mark. I sat at the kitchen table with the portfolio open, papers spread like wounds. My nursing training whispered to me, identify the infection, clean it out, don't let it spread. Trevor was the infection. The treatment would have to be truth. Then came the phone call that turned suspicion into heartbreak. It was a Wednesday morning, the sun bright on my roses, when Madison's name lit up my phone. For a split second, hope flared. Maybe she was coming back to herself. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice clipped, mechanical. "I wanted to let you know Trevor and I got married yesterday. Just immediate family and a few close friends. It was simple, beautiful." I stopped breathing. Yesterday, she had promised an October wedding, but she had already stood before vows, before witnesses that did not include me. "Congratulations," I managed, the word tasting foreign. "Thanks. It was perfect. His parents came, his sister flew in, even Jessica was there as maid of honor." She rattled off the details like a catalog description. Then, after a pause, "Trevor and I were hoping you'd send us the beach house keys. We're thinking of spending our honeymoon there since we didn't plan a trip." There it was, the truth beneath the announcement. The call wasn't about sharing joy. It was about the house, about possession. "The keys," I repeated slowly. "Yes, Trevor's really excited to see it. I've told him so much about it, about the renovations, the property value." Property value, how romantic. I asked the questions that mothers ask, even when they know the answers. "So you're legally married now?" "Yes, license and ceremony." Trevor thought a big wedding was too commercial. "Boundaries, Mom, remember?" "Boundaries. Exclusion disguised as independence." "I understand," I said, my voice level. "I'll make sure you get the keys." When we hung up, I sat in the garden staring at the roses, the hum of bees loud in the silence. Trevor had married her quickly, strategically, just days after I began digging into his past. He was accelerating, tightening the noose before Madison could hear the truth. But Trevor had miscalculated. He assumed that I, a 65-year-old widow with a quiet life and a part-time library job, would surrender, that I'd accept my exile with silence. Instead, I spent the next 72 hours assembling my wedding gift. I chose a leather portfolio, dignified, formal. I wrapped it in silver paper and tied it with a white bow, as if I were sending love instead of warning. Inside, I placed the documents, newspaper clippings of William Morrison's embezzlement, bank records of offshore accounts, a confession whispered on a deathbed. Trevor's grandfather hadn't just stolen from investors, he'd stolen from Robert, my ex-husband, the man who had left me hollow, but who had also been a victim. That money, now multiplied, legally belonged to Madison as Robert's heir. And Trevor had been accessing it for years, parading in expensive suits bought with stolen inheritance. I added contact information for the estate lawyer, for the investigator, for the people who had been waiting for someone to open this case. And yes, I tucked in the keys to the beach house because some gifts must be complete in order to sting. When I left the package at their door, I didn't knock. Justice doesn't need applause. By 2:17 p.m., my phone rang. Madison's number, Trevor's voice. "What the hell is wrong with you, you crazy old witch?" I lifted my teacup, steady. "Hello, Trevor. I take it you opened your wedding gift." "This isn't funny. This is harassment. I'm calling the police." "Harassment," I said, feigning confusion. "What exactly would you report? That your mother-in-law gave you a gift filled with public records? Newspaper clippings? Bank ledgers?" Madison's voice broke faintly in the background. "Trevor, calm down. Let me talk to her." "No," he barked. "She's insane. She's trying to ruin our marriage." I smiled. "Trevor, surely you're not upset about a little family history. I thought you'd appreciate knowing about the accounts your grandfather left behind. Accounts you've been dipping into. Accounts that legally belong to my daughter." There was a pause, rage thinning into panic. "You're lying." "I was a nurse for nearly 40 years, I said softly. "Precision is my business, but don't take my word for it. Mr. Rodriguez in Miami remembers your grandfather's confession very well." The line went quiet, except for Madison's breathless, frantic questions. "Oh, and Trevor," I added, my voice calm as the tide. "The beach house keys are in the portfolio. Consider them part of the gift. Perhaps the ocean air will help you think clearly." Then I ended the call, set down my teacup, and listened to the silence of a predator, realizing his pattern had finally been broken. The call ended, but the storm it unleashed was only beginning. Trevor had screamed until his voice cracked, while Madison's sobs trembled beneath the noise. I set my phone down gently, as if the quiet handling of an object could counterbalance the violence of his fury. Outside, the garden was calm roses leaning into the late afternoon sun, bees still at their patient work. It felt obscene that the world hadn't shifted with me. For the next 2 days, silence stretched long. I drank my tea on the porch, reread old novels, and waited not for Trevor, but for Madison. I knew his rage would burn like a match. Her grief, though, would take time to open like a wound. On Sunday morning, I found her on my front steps. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes swollen from crying, and she wore the same clothes as Friday. She didn't even say hello. She just looked at me with the exhaustion of someone who had been living inside a lie. "Tell me everything," she whispered. I made coffee in the kitchen where her childhood had unfolded. The same table where she'd once written college essays now held manila folders and printed emails, Trevor's emails. She had searched his laptop after he stormed out. In his files were exchanges with a man named Marcus Webb, discussions about the Morrison inheritance, offshore accounts, and strategies for keeping access hidden. The dates stretched back years long before Madison had accidentally spilled coffee on Trevor in that downtown cafe. "It wasn't fate, Mom," she said bitterly, spreading the papers out. "He researched me. He knew about you, the beach house, even Dad's financial history. He planned it." Her voice cracked, but then grew stronger. "I called Emma, the woman from your investigator's report. She told me everything. The manipulation, the bank accounts, even a will leaving everything to him. Then she put me in touch with Sarah. Same story, same pattern." Her hands shook, but her eyes burned. "I was so stupid." "No," I said firmly, reaching across the table to cover her hand with mine. "You were targeted. Predators don't choose the weak, Madison. They choose the strong, the independent, the ones with something worth stealing." She swallowed, blinking fast. "Then I'm going to destroy him. But I'll need your help." Those words, "I'll need your help," were the truest gift she could have given me. For 2 years, I'd been pushed aside, dismissed, erased. Now, my daughter was asking me back into her story. Over the following week, Madison and I rebuilt our bond with determination sharper than grief. She met with the estate lawyer. She spoke to the federal investigator who had been tracking Trevor's patterns for months. She agreed to wear a wire, to let the FBI record him admitting to the offshore accounts, to turn her own betrayal into evidence strong enough to end his predatory career. And when Trevor came back, flowers in hand, apologies rehearsed, she smiled through her rage, whispered the words that would hook him, and let the agents move in. By Friday night, Trevor Morrison was in handcuffs, the charm stripped away, the predator caged. But for me, the real victory wasn't his downfall. It was Madison, sitting at my kitchen table, shoulders squared, voice steady, no longer echoing Trevor's script but speaking her own truth. The gift I had given wasn't revenge or even justice. It was clarity, the kind of clarity that sets you free and roots you again in the family that will never stop loving you. As I poured us both tea that night, I realized Trevor thought he was clever enough to rewrite our story. But the thing about stories is this: they always circle back to their true authors. And this one had always belonged to us.